A seismic week in the House of Commons kicked off by the defection of Nova Scotia MP Chris from the Conservatives to the Liberals, who were only too happy to leave the doors to the caucus room wide open so cameras could show the warm welcome for their new MP. That was only the first of two departures from the Conservative caucus this week. Yesterday, Alberta MP Matt Jeneroux announced he was leaving. Not to join the Liberals, as had been rumoured, but leaving politics entirely, giving notice he would resign at a later date. And as rumours and reports intensified that Jeneroux was facing coercion from within, Jeneroux doubled back, denying he was facing intense pressure from the Conservatives. For many, this was all a sign of trouble for Pierre Poilievre's leadership, but for Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer, it is all the consequence of relentless pressure from the Liberals.
The only rumours I've heard of intimidation and harassment are from Liberals badgering Conservatives in elevators and calling them at home. All of this is an attempt to distract from Mark Carney's first budget, a terrible budget that is being almost universally panned.
Okay, time now to check in with our party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. It is good to see you all. I do want to hear from my Conservative friend Fred on this, but Fred, I want to hear what your Conservative friends are saying about all of this. Where are things in your party right now?
It's a great question. Look, it was a tough week. There's no question when you lose two members and one to a floor crossing. Like you just showed those images of d'Entremont walking into caucus. I felt like I was punched in the stomach again. I've known Chris for 30 years almost, and he was a Conservative staffer, turned MLA and provincial cabinet minister in Nova Scotia, and then a member of parliament continuously throughout all those things. I don't think he's done everything in between. So when you lose someone like that, it's like he's left the family. And I know we have issues at times as a party. All parties do. And someone that was such a lifer in our party, it hurts tremendously to see something like that happen. Now, of course, I'm a hypocrite at this. I always welcome when Liberals cross to my party. I remember in Nova Scotia in the last year and a half, Fred Tilley and Brendan Maguire crossed to Tim Houston's PC government and are now excellent members of his cabinet. So, it goes both ways, but there's no question to partisans like me and to many out there and people who would have worked for d'Entremont, it really hurts.
Yeah, look, it's patriotism when your crowd does it. It's opportunism when the other crowd does it.
Thank
right?
you,
yeah.
Thank you for getting that.
Yeah, no, I mean, like Leona Alislev was standing up for her country. Chris d'Entremont is betraying everything he stood for. It's just the way this goes.
Said it better.
Right? Yeah, everything's a Rorschach test in politics. Greg, what is your sense of it? Like, Look, I got to check my phone before I say anything definitive on what's happening. I thought it was over after d'Entremont and the rumors, but then we saw the resignation, not a defection. It feels like what we're hearing now is there are people inside the Conservative caucus frustrated with the still direction of the leader. The RCMP video seems to have been, or the comments seems to have been a real trigger point here. Where do you think things stand at this moment?
Well, I have some experience with floor crossing. I worked for Belinda Stronach as a Liberal.
Right.
I worked on 2 floor crossings in Nova Scotia that never came to light, and until I get my book deal or my pamphlet deal, no one will ever know what happened there. I think once it hits the rumor current, the chances of floor crossing actually starts to decline. Because what you see happen is, they release the hounds. And I find it most amusing that Andrew Scheer talks about the Liberal pressure tactics. I came out of the budget lockup, God, when was that, David? Tuesday?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm about to cross Wellington Street, and I see Andrew Scheer and Chris Workington rushing across the street. Chris Workington, I believe, is the Deputy Conservative Whip. House Leader is Andrew Scheer. And I'm told that they ended up just showing up at Chris d'Entremont's office.
Yeah.
And I wasn't in the room, but the people who have talked to me about this, about the just kind of showing up, lovely office you've got here.
Yeah.
shame if you had to move.
Well, this was right after Politico published its story, quoting Chris D'Entremont as saying he was thinking about joining the Liberals and voting for the budget. So this would attract the attention of the House leadership of the Conservative Party.
And I will say that the effect that it had was very much an intensive pressure tactic.
Yeah.
So you've talked about Leona Aleslev. Floor crossing is in the eye of the beholder. I look at it as a case-by-case basis. I mean, I remember when Belinda Stronach was talking to reporters, her concerns about the Conservatives being against same-sex marriage, her concerns about the Conservatives cozying up to the Bloc, and we were much closer to we were a decade away from the referendum then. So I think what she stood for then, I think is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Eve Adams, when she crossed the floor to the Liberals, I was kind of, why do we need her right now? We're going into an election.
Well, then it turns out you didn't, because Marco Mendicino beat her in a nomination and ended up running and winning. Mel, what do you make of where things stand? I mean, we have not heard from Mr. Poilievre outside of speeches. He hasn't sort of addressed this. He did have a nice post on social media about Matt Jeneroux. Where do you think his leadership is? Where do you think the unity of that caucus appears to be?
Right. Well, not great. This is not the kind of week that you want. Also, I don't know that the budget was what most people were expecting, and we're not talking about that, and people aren't really talking about that. They're talking about this, right? So the fact that folks are given another reason to question Pierre Poilievre's leadership, I don't think is good for him, and I don't think it's good for the Conservative caucus either. We've talked around this table a few times. We've each had an opportunity to talk about our different parties. When you're talking about the drama inside the tent or inside the caucus, people don't like that. Voters don't like that. They want to know that your things at home are dealt with, so that you can focus on them and fighting for them.
They don't like it in terms of their support for your party, not the content we're creating right now. Okay, I see what you mean.
They love the content.
I was going to say, because
they just don't want to vote for you when your affairs aren't in order, right? So they don't like that. So it's not a good week for Pierre Poilievre. I think the response from caucus members when D'Entremont resigned or went over to the Liberals, I think is case in proof to me of like, why the hell would I be in this caucus if that's the kind of stuff that you're putting on social media? And I know that feelings are hurt and that's a thing, but to me it was just like mean people being mean, and I'm like, well, good riddance. Thank you for showing me your true colors. When I read D'Entremont's statement, I read it once. I was like, all right, tell us the real reason. But then I read it a second time as if I was reading it like I was my parents, and I was nodding my head. This sounds really reasonable. We're at a really important moment as a country, and I think that this is what's best for the country. So for real folks at home, you're seeing that you want the parties to be working together more than ever right now because of this immense threat that we have with President Trump. And then you see, Conservative MPs doing those kinds of attacks with him, crossing the floors on Twitter. I don't think that that's a good sign. And you're not talking about your message, which is also not, at the end of the day, not what you want. So yeah, not a good week for the Conservatives or Pierre Poilievre.
Losing the narrative, as someone on this panel likes to talk about. Fred, the budget has kind of become headline number 3. It's the fall budget is the new Fez, right, as you would say. But I want to show a bit more of the tape in a second, but I just want to ask you about this. Like, we know, like, Liberals and Conservatives in Atlantic Canada, it's not the mass sort of, like, polarization as we see as you go further west in the country. Well, Chris D'Entremont can win his seat as a Liberal, should there be an election, right? Like, this is he's probably in a stronger political position today than he was. What do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting in the Maritimes where you have a little bit more of a local pull as an incumbent. Yeah. I would usually say incumbents don't have much impact across the board in Canada, but in the Maritimes it is different. Yeah. And there is that riding was traditionally a swing riding that used to swing back between Liberals and Conservatives, regardless of who formed government. It has been a little bit more blue the last number of elections. Greg Kerr held it for 2 terms, Liberal for once, and then D'Entremont now on his 3rd. So, but he only won by a small margin. Yeah. So I think it's going to be a big fight next election, and I'm sure both parties are going to target it very hard.
But the Liberals under Kearney in the Atlantic provinces versus the Liberals under Trudeau at the end, it's night and day, right?
Sure.
Totally different thing.
But that's if the election's now.
Yeah.
If the election's a year or 2, and what has Kearney actually built becomes the ballot question, then that changes the game.
Yes, absolutely, whether this budget does in fact work. Look, we want to show you some reaction from last night. Our reporters were on Parliament Hill moments after, well, we all learned, and MPs learned of Matt Jeneroux's resignation. Here's how Conservatives reacted to the news.
Matt has made his decision to return to private life, and I think you're all looking for something more complicated than that. He supports this party, he supports our caucus, We all wish him well.
He was a great MP and an even better human being, and I wish him all the best as he transitions into private life. We all have to make that transition at some point.
I think a lot of the press want to make it political. I think this is an opportunity for the press to pile on. But here's a man with a record that is undeniably a very strong one for the people of Edmonton, for the people of Alberta, and for all Canada.
Okay, that's how some Conservatives responded to Jeneroux's departure. Here's how other parties took the news.
I think he was dealing with some criticism within his own party, and that was difficult for him.
What do you mean criticism from his own party? Were they harassing him?
No, I'm not going to comment on that. And I think I have some sympathy for Matt. He found himself in a difficult spot.
Being pressured not to join the Liberal caucus so poisoned the relationship that he felt he couldn't even continue as an independent member of Parliament, staying in this place as a valued colleague. So I think it's very sad, and he will, I'm sure, eventually share more of his reasons.
When you hear that the Conservatives issued a warning to him that there would be consequences. What was that warning? What was the threat that they were posing on Matt Jeneroux, who's, like, again, just one of the most nonpartisan MPs that has been a champion for men's mental health? And I'm really proud to have had the opportunity to work with him, but also see him at work.
Greg, what a contrast in the response from what Chris D'Entremont got, because it seems like it was vicious on D'Entremont for what he did, and that caused some backlash internally and consternation internally. I mean, what do you make of the different responses as the week went on?
The first gentleman, I think it's Kelly, who's a Conservative MP, and he, nothing to see here approach with the reporters. If I was advising that MP, I would say, don't say that unless you're absolutely sure nothing else is going to come out. And I'm not convinced that that's going to be the case. The floor crossings may have stopped, but I talked a couple of weeks ago about the way some Conservative MPs were treated by Jenny Byrne, other staff, by the leader. They're not going to forget that quickly, and they may not cross the floor. But one of the things that people noticed about Matt Jeneroux, who I quite like, I think he's a super guy, great MP, but he had stopped going to caucus. So there's a lot of power in the Conservative caucus, the individual MPs' hands at this point, because they know what they experienced. They know that they lost a 20-point lead. So I would not be saying that. And also, it's not just what they did with Chris. And if I find out, and I think if people in Nova Scotia find out that he or his family have been harassed, there'll be a very dim view taken of that. But back when former Conservative MP Alain Reyes from Quebec sat as an independent, the Conservative Party had to issue an apology because they sent out an official text putting his constituency number so people could harass him. So there is a pattern here, David.
Yeah, they tried to napalm Alain Reyes for sure. That's what happened there. That was Pat Kelly, by the way, the Conservative MP there. Mel, look, I look at that and they say, oh, nothing to see here, it's all good. It's the press trying to whip it up. Sure. Conservatives are the ones that are providing the information about what's happening inside the Conservative caucus. And the ones who go on camera to say it's all okay, well, maybe they're not the ones who are actually worried or whatever. I mean, what do you make of what we saw there, whether that tells us anything about what's happening there?
Well, what I found interesting is we had the three first folks, the three Conservative MPs, and then we had three non-Conservative MPs. And obviously, I'm not a Conservative, so maybe I don't buy them just because I don't buy them. But it seemed like a show was being put on, and then folks just generally speaking about somebody that they may consider a friend. That's how I felt about that. Is it felt like we were saying nothing to see here because we needed to say that there was nothing to see here, and then three people who were worried about what somebody they worked closely with could be going through. That is, I think, the theme of both D'Entremont and Jeneroux is people across the aisle enjoyed working with them. They had nice things to say. They thought, obviously everybody's partisan in that house, but they were able to work with them. So I think seeing both those things happen this week, both reactions are obviously very different, but still not great, I don't think, for the Conservative Party. And whether there is nothing to see here or not, the guy resigned 2 days after the budget, and a day or before it was official that his
right in the middle of a confidence
vote.
Yes,
right? When the government needs, what, 3 people to cross?
2 now is where they are. Yeah.
So whether you want to say there's nothing to see here or not, there has to be. That is not something that you do for no reason in the middle of a really busy week, probably the busiest of weeks in Canadian politics in normal times. So yeah, that's...
Yeah, no, and Fred, the nothing to see here. Well, Matt Jeneroux met with the Prime Minister on Monday. Like multiple sources are telling us this, and not just us, all kinds of media organizations. Liberals believed even at midweek that he was going to get out of Ottawa, he was going to go home, he was going to talk to people, and there was a chance he was going to just do the defection during the break week. But instead what happened is you saw what happened with D'Entremont and didn't want to go through that and whatever other stuff was going on. So there's definitely something to see here, Fred, because you don't meet with the Prime Minister as the MP for Edmonton Riverbend unless, you're really talking about something big.
Well, look, contrast to the former Prime Minister, who I don't think met with his own caucus. So good for Prime Minister Carney to meet with the opposition. But no, look, I had obviously heard a lot of chatter Wednesday throughout the day. I had heard it was confirmed at some point that he was joining the Liberal caucus. So the resignation was certainly eyebrow-raising when you broke that, David. But I think Conservatives, I know it was a bad week. We can't say that polish this in any other way. We lost a member to the Liberals. We had another member resign. But I think there's still a sense of relief that he didn't join the Liberal caucus.
Yes.
That is a powerful, powerful blow like the D'Entremont one was. And it would have been really, really bad to have two go to the Liberal caucus. So I do get where there's, nothing to see here, try to spin that all politicians will try to do. This is a game of, everyone's trying to score points between the two main parties. So I get where they're coming from in that type of messaging, but it is hard to believe, of course, knowing what we know.
Well, Fred, in some ways, as bad as the resignation is, the way Matt Jeneroux, the way it ended up, he kind of did Pierre Poilievre a favor in that he is not defecting and not necessarily resigning and causing a by-election until after the leadership, right? Review happens in Calgary. So, imagine if Poilievre was limping into Calgary, potentially losing an Edmonton by-election, right? So where do you think this leaves Mr. Poilievre and the strength of his leadership and control of his caucus?
Look, the leadership review is end of January. I think he's in a very strong position with the party. I think the party's very much behind him in terms of the membership. The segment you had on before us with the two Davids, when Hurley was talking about caucus being a threat. Caucus is absolutely a threat, and there is a mechanism now to remove a leader. I've been through that before when I was campaign manager for Aaron O'Toole, when that mechanism was used to remove him. So there is something there. But, and I think Kate McKenna mentioned earlier how there was, about a dozen MPs who were, frustrated. That's not nearly enough to trigger anything. And I think Poilievre has a lot of loyalists in that caucus to protect him. So ultimately, I think the person who's going to decide if Poilievre leads the party into the next election is going to be Pierre Poilievre himself. It's going to be up to him, and right now I have every indication that's going to be the case.
Yeah, and Fred mentions the Kate McKenna reporting off the top of the show. There's also a Toronto Star article out today. We're all in the same range. The Toronto Star reporting Conservatives are struggling to stay united is the headline. A source told the Star 10 to 15 MPs within the caucus are very frustrated with Poilievre's leadership, but not clear whether they think about confronting him or crossing the floor or quitting altogether. And Greg, this kind of aligns with what I've been hearing, what Kate was reporting. Frustrated, but maybe people just say, I'm not going to run again or I'm going to quit, because there seems to be, after the podcast interview and the comments in the RCMP, that the change some of the more moderates inside the Conservatives want to see may never come.
Totally. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And, in terms of the Reform Act and the number of caucus, Fred knows that better than I do, but Stockwell Day was not that long ago. And there were enough MPs that left that and were able to cobble together another caucus.
Justin Trudeau wasn't that long ago, right? Like a couple of dozen signed a letter and it didn't work, and then it took Chrystia Freeland, Well,
David, it strikes me that there was a situation where a leader was promising to change. There was a podcast where the answers during the podcast alarmed a lot of people in their own caucus. And then all of a sudden, their leadership was threatened. And am I talking about Justin Trudeau or am I talking about Pierre Poilievre? Because there are a lot of similarities in both cases. And if you are not listening to what your caucus is telling you, and they're giving you some pretty strong messages here.
Well, you get these narrative points. Toronto St. Paul's, LaSalle Mard, caucus letters, Chrystia Freeland. National election, Carleton. Chris D'Entremont and Mel now Matt Jeneroux, right? These things start to become, to use Fred's, a narrative of their own, and it becomes tough to reverse.
Yeah, and we've joked around this table a few times that Mark Carney could be a progressive conservative. So for folks in that caucus who are of that leaning, who don't necessarily agree with what Pierre Poilievre says, whether it be on the podcast, whether it be on Twitter, spending his time talking about the convoy or DEI over Thanksgiving weekend. I don't know that you think that you always have a place that is the place that you thought you were taking space in. I would say the other thing that I find interesting is we've heard repeatedly since the last election that Pierre Poilievre is doing some, soul searching, and he's going to change, and the party should be looking at what worked during the election, what didn't. And if I'm caucus, I'm holding him accountable to that. And we have not in any way, shape, or form seen that. If anything, we've just seen him lean in more on the things that, I've said before, turned my parents off from voting for the Conservatives. Yeah. So I can imagine if I'm those folks who are looking for that shift, who are looking for the what then, what are we doing, what is our narrative, what are we talking about to beat Mark Carney in the next election, then I don't like any of this. And then the way that D'Entremont, Jeneroux, and others could have been treated just makes that even worse.
Well, there seems to be a belief that circumstances were what cost the election, right? Trump and the change and these sorts of things, and who knows. But
for me too.
Just
circumstances.
Exactly. Yes, the NDP was all circumstantial. Look, I want to play a clip from Prime Minister Mark Carney, because he was in Toronto today giving a speech at the Canadian Club talking about the budget. Remember that? And he was participating in one of those fireside Q&A. And as it wrapped up, he was asked about a majority government, and the Prime Minister let it be known that the Liberal caucus doors are metaphorically wide open as well as physically wide open. Have a listen to this.
How many seats do you need to have a majority?
I can't remember.
Do you want to answer?
Need a couple.
Just a couple.
Just
all right.
a couple. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
So call your local MP if they're not a Liberal and tell them to come in. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very good.
Fred, what do you make of that? Like, they're hunting for him. Is he trolling people there, or do you think they're really going for it here?
Well, it's interesting because I mentioned many, many times the last week or so of the campaign, they took their foot off the gas and allowed themselves to be in this minority situation. And we heard so many rumblings then that he didn't seem to care. He seemed to be fine with the minority and he was just going to plow ahead with it. Now I think they're seeing the state of the House and how things are, that they really need that to be functional. And I do strongly believe if they do not get this majority, we are going to go within the next 8 months or so. The election, I thought maybe it could happen this fall. I think we're probably going to avoid that now. But this is not a parliament built to last. So I understand what he is going to try to do. The easiest way for him to get a majority is not an election. It's going to be floor crossers. But on that point, and something Greg mentioned earlier about Belinda Stronach's floor crossing and the talk about narrative, I was there in 2005. We had our war room built and ready to go. We had the votes to take Paul Martin's Liberal government down. And then Belinda crossed, saved the government. And what we did, we had a lot of internal reflection. We did that summer. I say we, I was very, very, very junior then, but I was around. Stephen Harper rebuilt his narrative. He rebuilt his campaign team and his structure and his senior leadership. And then 6 months later, he was Prime Minister of Canada. So if Poilievre can take the lessons, maybe not just of the campaign and what's been going on, but where we are today and apply that and look at our past and see how things have worked. If he does that, and again, we haven't seen that he's that open to do it, but if he does that, there is a path, I think, for him to do something here to potentially, save himself and form government.
Okay, we got 2 minutes left, and we're going to go. Greg, majority by budget day? Do you think it's possible? Majority by Christmas Day? Or do you think it is more Fred's scenario that then maybe the budget survives and we have an election next year?
Look, when Scott Bryson crossed the floor, very quickly after that, Prime Minister Paul Martin was in his riding. I would expect that you're going to see something similar for Chris D'Entremont.
Shore it up.
That they'll, his riding will be getting a visit very soon. I'm not as convinced as Fred that that there could be an election this soon. I'm not as convinced that Pierre is going to sail to leadership. He has stacked the leadership review. It's in January. It's in Calgary. I think there's a progressive Conservative Ontario meeting going on at the same time. He needs to start getting 85, 88% at this, and these dribs and drabs are taking that away from him. So I'm not convinced that Poilievre is out of the woods yet.
Okay, but do you think Mark Carney gets the majority, or do you think he's close and we go into 2026 still in a minority?
I don't know. I'm watching TV. I see a guy across the floor. I see the Prime Minister with him, and the riding seems pretty happy. Maybe that's going to help.
Okay, Mel, your thoughts?
I don't think we see a majority anytime soon. I'm just really glad that we've avoided accidentally being in an election because the opposition didn't know whether or not they were voting for, against, or abstaining. So as a Canadian and as a political person, I'm glad we're not going to an election in the next week, hopefully.
Okay.